Well, I couldn't self-locate, right? It was like, say you're trying to tune into a radio station and there's just so much interference of other stations that you can't quite hear the song that's playing. Yeah.
Welcome to another episode of What It's Like to Be You. I'm Josh Levine, your host, and today my guest is Anna Palumbo. Anna is a social self-pres 9-wing 8 937 trifix. And I'm catching Anna at a moment where she is going through a tremendous attachment metamorphosis, where she's a mom. She has a daughter who is a type 6 and kind of has been going through an awakening, realizing just how enmeshed and attached into her daughter she's been, and doing the process of disentangling herself emotionally, psychologically, somatically from her daughter, and what that has meant in terms of the space that she's been able to open up and reclaim inside herself to access deeper wisdom and more centeredness and not be so psychologically anchored in the storm of the relationship and whatever kind of issues her daughter was presenting. And we kind of we use that as a way to talk about how the 9 positive outlook structure works. Like, you know, when someone else that you're attached to is experiencing some darkness or pain and they're getting identified into it and you are enmeshed with them, what happens? What is it? Is a 9, like on the inside of a 9, it feels like there's something being lost with that identification with the darkness, some hope, some sense of possibility, some sense of, the possibility that it's all good. And the reflex that 9 has to get in there and kind of smooth things over, and how that can create a miss, an attunement miss. And something that's not talked about often enough in terms of the journey of reclaiming oneself as a 9 is that, remember, 9s are attachment types in the body center. And what that means is that they have, when they're attaching, they're kind of numbing themselves to the world so that they can settle with what the world is providing and make themselves okay with it. And the journey of reclaiming oneself as a 9 means resensitizing to the world. And what that also means is that you become more sensitive as you reclaim sensation. You become more sensitive to the ways that the world is not actually meeting you or tuning to you. And that can be very painful. So there's that. That's like one of the reasons 9s resist actually kind of waking up, is because they have to actually experience the pain that they've been numbing themselves to. That's number 1. 2 is the way that I think this is especially true as a social type, but it doesn't matter if you're even social blind. This is also true. It's like when you reclaim yourself as an attachment type and you start being congruent with yourself, when you start acting authentically and not adapting so much into other people, the relationships, like the status quo of your relationships that have depended on your adaptation to them, starts to get threatened. And so your relationship starts shifting, and you being a little more of a solid object as opposed to kind of like an adaptable putty that can fit into whatever cracks they're giving you. People have to find new ways of relating to you, and it can cause friction in your relationships. And that is like probably the single hardest thing for attachment types to deal with as they move forward in their journey of reclaiming themselves. So before we get to the interview, I want to do one thing, which is plug our Intro to the Enneagram course at the Enneagram School. You can go check it out on our website. It is now available for sale, and I want to tell you a little bit about it. It's 9 hours of very carefully edited audio content in the form of kind of podcast form, and it's broken into 30-minute chunks that are very easily digestible. In my view, it's the most rigorous and accurate intro to the Enneagram program available online. And it's perfect for beginners if you are just starting an Enneagram, but it's also really good for advanced students to get a refresher on the basics and kind of see how all the major concepts fit together into a cohesive whole that makes the Enneagram. And so it also comes with a 37-page ebook that has graphics and visuals that make the content easier to follow and digest. And we also include some of the original content that we've come up with in the last few years around the development of the centers during infancy, and some other just sharp insights that we have developed over the last few years and discoveries we've made in our kind of Enneagram investigations. So I really do think it's the best thing out there, and I invite you to go check it out at theenneagramschool.com. Okay, that's it. And without further ado, I am excited for you to learn about Type 9 from my friend Anna. So I kind of would love to ask you, how would you like to start? Because so much is going on with you. And
Mhm.
originally you reached out to me about doing a potential coaching session. And then we talked about doing this instead, or at least at first to do this.
Yeah.
Um, but I know that you're kind of in the middle of a pretty big process. And so I'd love to just open the floor and just hear kind of the story, like what's happening. And
Yeah.
yeah, just take us through it.
Sure. So I'll go back a year because that's when I feel like things really started to come to the forefront for me in regards to attachment.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm a mom. I'm a mom of three. My oldest is 16.
Mm-hmm.
And her and I are very, you say in tune with each other. It goes beyond that. So I had her in my early 20s. I was still kind of forming as an adult
Mm-hmm.
myself.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was a single mom and I had to learn how to be highly attuned to her to, keep her alive.
Uh-huh.
And so as we grew up, there's always been this really powerful attachment with her. And as we got into the teenage years, that became challenging. Her process and, um, uh, you know, what the way she expresses herself is very dynamic. It's much more so than, um, how I express myself. And, there was a lot of co regulation I was doing for her. She feels things quite intensely. And it was very challenging for me to parent effectively
Mm-hmm.
because there was always this kind of desire to sort of like be the buffer for her between her and the world in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, you know, the years of 12, 13, 14, 15, I would get to this place where I would be having my own emotional experience while she's having her emotional experience. And it was just like this attachment entanglement. And I wanted to be able to show up for her in a more present way. And I wanted there to be some sort of separation between our processes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because not only, was I suffering, but I could see that, I wasn't really like speaking to the strongest part in her. And there was a way that it was preventing her from really developing and using those tools of self-regulation
Yeah.
and developing that like confidence in herself.
Do you have are you willing to share without breaching any boundaries on behalf of your daughter, but just kind of like at a high level, some context, what was going on and what you were getting kind of enmeshed into?
Yeah. Um, so it could kind of unfold like, my daughter's a 6. I'll just frame it like that. So
Okay.
there's often a problem.
Okay. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
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 And, um, me and my 9 way would first kind of swoop in to minimize and do positive reframe.
Okay. Right.
Um, so this was not landing with her.
Right.
And if anything, it just kind of made her double down on like, no, this is a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, I would kind of feel destabilized and um, just double down on my positive reframe and trying to, provide a solution or a perspective shift. And what she really needed from me at times was just somebody to like be in the muck with her and be
Mm-hmm.
like, no, that really fucking sucks. I'm sorry. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you get down there. And I noticed that when I was able to drop into that, she didn't have to hold the charge of the problem as much.
Uh-huh.
She,
Yeah.
a big component to her process is the witnessing. Um, And so that was hard for me to get into that, it felt kind of like, against my um, reflex to
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
go there. But I knew that I had to change something because, when I was just missing the mark continually. And so there was this frustration between the two of us where, she would sense that I was having emotions around her experience and then she would take that on. And then it was just this like, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah. So entanglement, the word I use a lot. Um, and, during those communications, I would just totally lose the thread of what I was trying to communicate, really. Like, where's the wisdom that I want to actually, you know, where's the container I want to provide for her? Where's the wisdom without just like trying to minimize it because I don't want there to be conflict, right? Because my
Mm-hmm.
approach essentially was to try to make things more pleasant for myself. you know, she was actually okay with, she has a higher capacity or threshold for discomfort, emotional discomfort than I do.
Okay.
Um, so, I was, as my awareness was kind of trickling in and I'm feeling this sense of just continually missing the mark with my daughter and knowing that it's also coming from a place of just feeling like I was employing my own strategies that were lifelong patterns of trying to kind of, keep the conflict over there, not fully get into it, minimize and positive reframe.
Right.
Um, so, in order to start making these shifts, it really required a slowing down for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and, it started by being able to drop into that negative space with her and not offer anything. Um, and, that was really hard to do at first.
Yeah.
But once I started seeing that if things would just relax between us, we weren't trying to hold these two polarities anymore. There was room for the conversation to just naturally kind of unfold.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so, you know, of, of course, I'm faced with this like multiple times a day. Just, like
Right.
once or
Yeah.
twice. We're
Yeah.
in it all the time.
Uh-huh.
Um, and uh, so, one of the other parts of this is that um, it required, in order to not be like overly attuned to her, I had to self attune. Um, because when I was in the space of really like trying to, it's going to take a second. I'm kind of
Sure.
losing my train of thought. So as I approached this pattern with my daughter from a slightly different place,
Mm-hmm.
one in which I am being more present to her experience and more tapped into my own location.
Yeah.
Um, I there was this noticeable shift between us, and those are hard moments to get through initially. I had to do some deep breathing. I had to do some, EFT tapping.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I had to do a lot of kind of internal talk. And one of the mantras I used was like, I'm okay, even if you're not okay.
Oh, okay.
And,
Yeah.
you
That's
know,
good. Yeah.
yeah. So that just kind of helped create this like, it started off with just kind of like, inches of separation. And it slowly, we were able to kind of disentangle our emotional processes. So we weren't quite so bound up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And in that process of really kind of like anchoring into myself more in these moments, I'm able to I'm not as afraid to hold boundaries with her. Um, it's not like a reflexive boundary that comes up because I'm feeling like I've self abandoned and now trying to get back to myself. It's more of like an authentic space of, you know, sovereignty in a way. And, I had to really remind her. And, I was totally open and transparent with her about this whole thing. I said, like, you and I are in this tricky relating style that really worked for us at one point,
Hmm.
and now, like, we both need to do something different. I'm not too sure what it looks like, but um, the things that I'm going to be doing are, giving you a bit more space and like control over your own emotional experience. I'm going to step back and I really believe I know you have the tools to deal with this. And I know that you're strong and smart and wise, and I'm always here for you, but I'm not going to be like swooping in to try to like fix it for you.
Hmm.
Um, and, I recognize the ways that my swooping in were to kind of like dampen my own feelings of discomfort with, conflict and, you know, your emotional process, which is yours, not mine.
Right. Right.
uh, so, yeah, the shifts that started happening were um, one of the things I noticed immediately was like this incredible return of energy to myself. And it
Oh
was
yeah.
like I had taken a plug out of something else and just like plugged it back into myself.
Sure.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Because I was noticing that, like, even when I'm in the room with her, I'm no longer just like, my senses aren't way out there trying to
Hmm.
detect what's going on.
Yeah.
They're with me. And, I might be able to observe that, there's something going on for her, but I don't have to, it doesn't have to disrupt my, my inner workings. It doesn't have to like trigger that sort of like attachment, um, ping in the same way. I still care, I'm still there, but I'm not just like as activated.
Yeah.
Um, and for her, it's been helpful because, she sends out a lot of pings.
Uh-huh.
And, when it doesn't get bounced back and kind of amplified like it was happening, she is able to sort of, I can see, just move through it. Um,
Yeah.
a little bit more um yeah, it's kind of like her process requires a little bit less of that witnessing now. um
Okay.
and for her and I also, it has, like, there's been, especially now, so we're kind of, a year into it, um there's been a real like settling and just our ability to really enjoy our interactions
Okay.
in a whole new way.
Yeah.
um, that, yeah, isn't just as like enmeshed.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, there's a lot of threads in that and what you just said there. What's coming up for me just as a reflection is that it's like being core nine, you can get psychologically and somatically anchored in someone outside of you. And their state in a certain way becomes your state. Like the porousness of the nine nervous system, it's like they're sort of just infusing you with their energy in a way that is like hard to without real conscious intention. You don't really have a boundary against it. You're just kind of, it's just happening, you know. That's a really interesting dynamic. Like this entanglement. I love your word entanglement. I mean, it's like um now that you're in a new place of having some psychological somatic distance, um do you have new language for what it was like when you were kind of more fused, or what, yeah, just what that's like, inside?
So the way I would describe it is, it's like there's no clear end or clear definition of where I end and she begins,
Yeah. Yeah.
sort of thing, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it was really like foggy a lot
Yeah.
because
That's good. Yeah.
I wasn't I wasn't able to actually see her clearly
Mm-hmm.
because I was impressing upon the entire experience like my own sense away, like mixing the
Right.
two together.
Yeah.
So, when the fog started to clear, I had all these revelations. I was like, oh, my daughter is like incredibly emotionally like um aware in a way that I wasn't at that age.
Mm-hmm.
She is like one of the things I really admire about her is um how well she's able to articulate and name difficult emotions.
Okay.
Like
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't even doing that until I was like in my 30s.
Yeah. Sure.
So, that positive reframe has a tendency to like, amputate a whole bunch of the experience. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so there was, even though it was triggering because it felt so negative, it was more ballistic in a lot of ways. So um and one of the things that I feel like I've had so much to learn from her since we've been able to get a little bit of separation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in that regard of, um, yeah, being able to be okay with identifying with some of those
Sure.
more negative emotions.
Right. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add, like, I think that this type of like fusion, I'm sure it's pretty common between two attachment types.
I think so. Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
like the they're just like the hooks are there on both
Yeah.
sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? For contrast, my middle child is not an attachment type. And like
Mm-hmm.
we don't have any of these same dynamics at all.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Um, he's very boundaried and if anything, like I'm fighting to like get in there and have influence once in a while.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Uh,
it's just like we're just never gonna have to have that issue. It's
right.
it's it's such a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
And, I can understand how, from the outside looking in, my partner is an 8-wing 7. And, he could see this dynamic very clearly for many, many years and
Okay.
could not understand how I couldn't just separate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Just don't let it bother you. Like, what do you mean?
So that amazing hex adverse attachment worldviews. It's like,
Yeah.
that's a profound relational assumption, like a difference in the way that you guys experience relationship, like being core 8
Yeah.
versus core 9. Yeah.
So it really did have to get to a point where like a personal crisis for me in
Mm-hmm.
being tethered to this, at times it felt like a roller coaster in
Mm-hmm.
somebody else.
Yeah.
And it was motivated like by selfish reasons because I just wanted to feel um, some distance and better and healthier in
Because you were
relating.
getting swept up in her emotional storm
Yeah.
too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Way too much.
Right. 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 Can you talk about I mean, it would be sort of too glib or simple to say something like, well, if you're fused with someone and they're going through something, then you're going through something automatically because of the nature of enmeshment. But
Yeah.
I kind of want to get more texture on your inner experience of what that was like and also what it's like now and just like the difference between the two.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I couldn't self-locate.
Yeah.
Right? It was like,
Okay.
say you're trying to tune into a radio station and there's just so much interference of other stations that you can't quite hear the song that's playing.
That's an incredible analogy. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So now that I am able to have created some distance, it's like my inner voice is clearer. And I'm no longer kind of taking so many things into consideration
Yeah.
in trying to, approach my communications with her because I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sort of like preemptively trying to you know, subconsciously manipulate or minimize what could be conflict or, a boundary that might not land well with her or something like that. So
Mm-hmm.
there is a way where I'm operating from a more authentic place.
Yeah.
And so when I'm interacting with her, I can actually hear the guidance and the voice that wants to come out and speak to her.
Yeah.
And it's tapped into like a deeper place where I've actually been like, oh, wow, there's like quite a bit of wisdom in there. Like,
Mm-hmm.
who would have known? Um, and there was a way in which before it felt like I was more in the shallows of communication in a way because
Okay.
um, I wasn't accessing um, that deeper place because I was just in my own emotional process and cut off from
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. I experienced this as a triple attachment type myself. I know when
Mhm.
I'm operating from like the a frothy inner place versus
Yeah,
like a truly settled, like from all the way down, like the channel is all the way open, all the way down, you know?
yeah. I was gonna say there's also a way in which, like, I would say her just being a six was particularly triggering for me, right?
Sure.
Because
Yeah. Yeah.
that's my stress line. So,
Yeah.
what she verbalizes as normal communication is like my most stressed inner dialogue.
Right. Yeah. 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 I'm laughing
So,
because my girlfriend's a six. I'm very familiar with the, yeah.
yeah. So, and I find this, I have quite a few sixes in my life. And,
Yeah.
it took me, until recently to be like, oh, they're not actually that stressed out. That's just like, that would be my stress response.
Hmm.
Um, but that's just, a day in the life for the six and in verbalizing that, that process.
Hmm.
Um, so to be able to kind of recognize that trigger and not let it get triggered.
Yeah.
Um, and then also just like really see the validity of, where she's coming from. And,
Yeah.
um, you know, she's a very wise human. She sees a lot.
Hmm.
And, um, yeah.
Yeah. I got a couple things. One is, earlier in this conversation, when you kind of took a moment for yourself, you kind of noticed that you were on autopilot. You reconnected to yourself. Can you give words to that? Like, what is that for you?
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, like it feels like a calling back of,
Hmm.
of some sort of like energetic tentacle,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So instead of like reaching out there to try to perform or like stretch far out of what I'm just like authentically trying to generate,
Hmm. Hmm.
there's a way in which it just, yeah, I will get a little bit too out of myself and then call that back in. And um, yeah, it's a moment of self location.
Right. Right. Is that
Yeah.
something that you do like that? I'm gonna use a blunt word, like the tool of taking a pause, closing your eyes, breathing, and coming back to yourself. Is that something that you do now in normal relationship and conversation?
Um, I can do it without having to do those steps. But one of the things I've noticed is, the way in which I have attempted to do that until
Hmm.
becoming really conscious of that pattern feels kind of typically 9 wing 8, which is kind of like a shutdown.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, yeah, to shut down the external stimuli
Hmm.
and self locate by just like a lack of interference. So
Hmm.
what that
Hmm.
looks like for other people is, like I'm energetically here, um, or physically here, but like there's not a lot coming out of me.
Right.
Um, and, can come off as like cold with other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Just the wall.
withdrawn.
Yeah.
Yeah, the wall. And,
Yeah.
oh man, like I can have that wall up for a really long time.
Yeah. How long are we talking? Like time.
Like days.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
It depends on how, I guess, how lost I'm feeling in a
Hmm.
sense. I went through a crisis about 7 years ago, and I had that wall up for like 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so um, there are other ways that I can access that. Actually, like music and art are like a quick sort of like side door into um, what feels like self location for
Sure.
me.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Um, but what I notice is like, I notice that locked in feeling, and it does just thaw. It's a process of like having a really, kind of strong containment. And what it feels like to me is like, um, I've used the term like aggressive peace, where it's just like
That's good. Yeah.
trying trying
Yeah.
to like keep the calm inner waters by keeping everything else out. And
Mm-hmm.
this was something I've done my whole life. My earliest memories of growing up in a busy house are of being able to find my sense of self through um, like yeah, the removing of external um, influences, whether that was like making a fort somewhere in the living room and, having my own physical space, or, going and drawing to have shut myself into my imaginary world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it has taken many different um, forms. But now, as an adult and, needing to be more on for the world, not having time to go build a fort in my living room.
Mm-hmm.
It's those moments of just really allowing myself to be still. Um, and, in that stillness, I can hear my own voice. I can
Mm-hmm.
feel my own center. And I do always feel a strong sense of center and a strong sense of home, which feels like it lives like deep in my belly.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay, a couple things just I want to kind of
yeah.
reflect and just to get my own clarity about something. It's like because you're anchoring for your own sense of stability to an inner place as opposed to an outer place, you're able to move through outer instability in a way that feels more strong and connected to yourself. And to withstand instability in the outer world because of that.
Yeah.
So um I have a kind of lingering curiosity about something. Just like I just want to know. I'm going to lay this out in a couple ways. So
Mm,
here's my lingering curiosity is about what is it that's so hard on the inside of being a nine
mm,
to be with someone when they're like really going through it, or like when they're in the middle of like a deep emotional reaction to something, like for example your daughter.
mm. Yeah. Okay. Um, well, I mean, it's an interesting thing because when I look through my history of my life, I have definitely not like avoided um, going into that zone with people. And I have often chosen partners and friends who are very intense
Mm-hmm.
personalities,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and who, um, yeah. And for me, I guess I have seen it as like the attachment challenge of of getting into that space, remaining attached, even though it's uncomfortable. Um, but like now, as I'm able to see that, that involved a lot of self-severing and dissociation to be able to
Mm-hmm.
maintain.
Mm-hmm.
There is something for me that feels different now when I am self-anchored, because there's like no threat anymore, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Um, Yeah, so before it was kind of like, um, feeling like I could just possibly get lost in somebody else's energy, because there was
Mm-hmm.
like, where was I in all of it? Um, I felt like I was existing kind of like in the space between, as opposed to like in
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and, and then I would, counteract that with, shutting in at times when it was overwhelming to try to
Mhm.
self-locate and then, like edging back out.
Mhm.
Um, so now I actually look forward to moments of like intensity and conflict in a way.
Mhm.
There's a bit of excitement there for me because I don't feel like I'm going to be lost in the
Yeah.
storm.
Yeah.
So it feels new and that's kind of exciting. Um, and, I, one of the things I really love about myself is like being able to show up for friends and family members when they're going through hard things. Like
Mhm.
I don't, my first instinct isn't to try to avoid it. Um, because I know that I can be there and be present in a different
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Um, does that answer your question?
Almost. Um, like so, and I'll reveal a little bit of myself. So my mom is a
Yeah.
9-wing 8, and one of the things that um I wonder about is like uh and disclaimer, my mom is an amazing mom, and she's been great in many ways. And also like some of what you're describing in terms of this enmeshment dynamic is familiar to me as
Yeah.
her kid. And when I've gone through moments of like my deepest darkness, it's been really hard for her,
Mhm. Yeah.
and the kind of swooping into positive reframe or remind me that I'm really valuable, or that but
Hmm.
why are you so down on yourself? You did this amazing thing, and and it's like
Yeah.
what I'm really craving is just an attunement and an acceptance of the place I'm at, and that would actually help my own process to move forward into the positive space that she was trying to kind of
Hmm.
lift me into. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
And so that's a familiar kind of miss to me from the other person's point of view. Um, yeah, but I guess I mean, is it as simple as when you're entangled with someone and they're going through a hard time, it feels like your hard time, and the um it's just really painful to bear as a 9, because, or how would you put it?
Yeah. I mean, kind of, but there's also a way in which, like, it almost to me feels like there's something that's going to be lost if we get too associated or identified with like the pain
Yeah,
or
I
something.
see.
It feels
Right.
like there's
Yeah, yeah.
always got to be like some sort of silver lining on it, right?
Uh-huh.
And but that is a way in which like I feel like with 918 we can just be like stubbornly not seeing something like a willful not like non-acknowledgement of like the true picture
Yeah.
that's there
Right. Yeah.
and looking at this tiny one little sliver of like, oh, there's a silver lining, and then just like inflating that to be more than what it is.
Mhm. Mhm.
And in a way, it almost feels like it's trying to balance what is going on with the other person, so that there's like, um, yeah, maybe like a more sense of like even keel, right? So if
Yeah.
somebody's in a real negative, intense state, I'm going to bring a more intense, positive state
Mhm.
to try to neutralize it. It feels
Yeah.
like a more of a like neutralizing type of thing that I'm trying to do, as opposed
Yeah,
to
yeah.
like even necessarily like inspire somebody or like lift them out of their doldrums. It just feels like I'm trying to like neutralize the fire because
Mhm.
that's not peaceful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, yeah. 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 And that thing that would be lost
Mhm.
if you didn't do that, what is that?
Yeah, I guess maybe that is just like it feels like the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, just wanting to kind of like give an exit for
Mhm.
somebody
Uh-huh.
in their, whatever they're feeling. I guess, trying to like remember that they don't need to over identify with one thing, that there is more
Right.
available. Um,
Yeah. I guess a lot like losing a sense of the possibility of hope or
yeah,
something
hopeful
like that.
outlook, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah.
And, it might be more of like my hope for that person more than they need that
Sure.
hope, right? It's
Right,
like,
right, right.
um, yeah, but
And that's a pretty interesting thing too, because in that state of entanglement, it's very easy to confuse what you hope for the person versus their hope for
oh, for
themselves or
sure.
whatever that, that, yeah.
Mhm.
Wow. Okay. So what else happened? what's what's the rest of the story? Where or what else is going on?
Yeah. So one thing that I'm noticing in this, new pattern that I'm in is that when there's more of it feels now like there's more of myself involved in my communications.
Yeah.
Um, and so I've been feeling and experiencing rejection on a deeper level, because I'm no longer kind of, sending myself out there in these sort of fractured ways of communicating.
When you say rejection, like receiving rejection from outside, or are you talking about the object, your own object relation of rejection? How are you using the term?
No, I'm talking about like, okay, so um, I'm wanting to show up authentically. I
Yeah.
am treading into conversations and places where I know that there could be potential conflict between
Right.
my true expression and
Mm-hmm.
how that's going to land for the other person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so when I get into those areas, and I'm not accepted or I'm met with something that, um, it could be a misunderstanding, or it could be, yeah, a conflict. Um, the rejection feels more real to me
Oh, I see.
because
Right.
it's
Yeah.
actually like more of me that I'm putting out
Yes. Oh,
there.
I totally get that. Yes, I totally
Yeah.
get that. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So there's a way in which I'm really kind of picking up on markers of safety in conversations in a
Mm-hmm.
different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, somebody could say to me, like, you're safe to express yourself, no judgment here. But if there is a mismatch between their energy and their
Yeah. Yeah.
words, it's
Yep.
like my fight or flight response is like coming online and I'm kind of seeing them as a threat,
Yeah.
and
There you go.
and then that
Mhm.
heart piece, that more authentic piece kind of walks back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I don't remember feeling as attuned to that, um, before because it just like there wasn't, um, as much of an investment on my part.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Oh, I see. Because
so
you were already shut down or shut off in some or numb in some
yeah,
way. So their sensitivity to you is less important.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, this has been challenging. There have been, a couple of relationships that have been, are being really tested by it,
Mm-hmm.
that I've noticed that, the relationship, um, the functionality of it has really depended on me, um, maintaining attachments, um, or, me being able to kind of, compromise myself in a
Right.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is in many ways I think it's like the hurdle. It's like there's a lot of hurdles to an attachment type kind of returning to themselves. But I think that's the one because it's
Yeah.
like when you come home to yourself and you start actually when you start matching your outside to your inside and you start actually living from that inner place in a congruent way,
Yeah.
it does sort of upend and threaten a lot of the ways that you've had relationships with people, especially the people that are the closest to you, because the people that you've been closely in relationship with are used to you being in a certain malleable state. And then when you solidify and they're like, wait, where is your adaptability going? I thought you were more putty than this. I thought you were more flexible.
Totally.
And then you start not being that. And it's like, whoa, what's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a real thing. And it's just, it's kind of been like I've been taking stock of a lot of different areas of my life. And
Mm-hmm.
like there's kind of like this process of weighing, like not, yeah, like weighing, does this match in the inner sense of something that I actually want to align with? And
Yeah.
a lot of things
Yeah.
actually don't match.
Yeah.
And so, I've had to kind of let go of my identity as like a really go with the flow, easygoing person and realize
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that I have strongly formed preferences on things.
Right.
Um, and yeah, it feels like I come up against that edge of like workability through things sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It definitely feels like there are more conflicts in my life in a way. So, that is challenging. And I noticed that, like as knowing I can have a certain bluntness um, that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
can sort of shut down communications in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so to kind of get into the zones where you need to work through something from a place of self location without resorting to attachment. It sometimes I'm just like at a loss because I don't know where the solution is, but I'm learning to be okay with there not needing to be a solution necessarily.
Right. Right.
Um, it feels like a lot of my relationships are in a sort of liminal space right now and
Mm-hmm.
feeling into um, what's next because I have changed in a sort of fundamental way
Mm-hmm.
and the relationship will need to change as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you willing to share a specific example?
Yeah. Okay. So this has come up quite a bit in my primary relationship, which was like a marriage type relationship. Been
Mm-hmm.
together for 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, um, we have a little jokey saying between us that like, I'll eventually get on board with anything.
Right. And you said he's an
And
8, wing 7, right?
he's an 8 wing 7. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, he's a very bold personality,
Mm-hmm.
lots of ideas, lots of forward momentum,
Mm-hmm.
lots of taking on projects
Mm-hmm.
and quick pivots in life, that sort of thing.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
it's not uncommon to come home and there's some new business venture or trajectory that has taken place during the day and
okay.
that sort of thing.
Right.
Um, so um, in a lot of ways, I felt like the supportive role in that relationship. And it, there have been many moments of adaptation and um, what felt like compromise or, me coming up against the edge of like, well, I'm not sure I'm on board for that, but okay. And
Right.
learning how to do that reconciliation inwardly as opposed to outwardly. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, whatever needs to shift, I'll shift it within me as opposed to like trying to shift the situation.
I'll be the one to adapt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, when we reach these sticky points now with differences of views, I mean, he's a bit of verbal processor, so we converse a lot. Um, it's yeah, we butt heads. There's a butting heads, and there's a little bit of like overlap with those eight energies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I, yeah, we oft like in this place right now, it's kind of hard to work through.
Mm-hmm.
We come up
Mm-hmm.
against the edge of not agreeing on something, and then both just kind of let it be for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we try to reapproach, it kind of like the pattern emerges again.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm not exactly sure how that's going to pan out for us.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but I definitely feel like I feel totally okay with the conflicts, which is kind of a new thing for me.
Yeah.
Um,
It's remarkable. Yeah.
yeah. And there's a way in which like I can find, and I'm also head last, right? So like I process stuff on a much slower speed, and eight wing seven is it can be really fast
Yeah.
energy,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
and there's a way in which I can get really disoriented in the conversations, and then just kind of at the end I'm like, okay, I'm just like sold on the idea, great, like whatever.
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm.
because it feels like it takes a lot of energy to just kind of like um, hold a polarity
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Um, and my partner is a great talker. He's very charismatic. He's very convincing.
Mm-hmm.
So um, now, kind of like tapped into this more steady spot in myself. Um, I don't necessarily feel like I have to be on the same page um, with him, with ideas or plans or that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And, what that looks like is, I'll just be like, well, I'm just not on board with that. And again, where I just don't feel that way, or I feel this way, and I'm really kind of learning to be okay with not needing to back it up with a bunch of justification.
There you go. That's good.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, because
Right.
I don't feel like it's really up for discussion as much,
I
which I
see.
think
Yeah.
is frustrating for my partner,
Mm-hmm.
because he kind of wants to get into it and try to, find resolve.
Yeah.
But um, I feel like if I start to get into the discussions, then I might get more into like the froth and farther away from my location, in a sense.
Yeah. There's also, I'll just speaking as a head last person myself who's gone on a somewhat similar journey to what you're describing in terms of coming home to myself and being able to stand conflict is, when you start explaining yourself, this is how I experience it. If someone wants me to explain
Mhm.
my point of view, it feels like I'm exposing a sort of a thing that can then be used against me in a certain way. Like, well, you said these reasons, but here's why those are invalid. To someone
Yeah.
who's really good at at
Hmm.
explaining your explanations away.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, there's just a felt sense of this is my preference, and it doesn't have to have an explanation behind it. That feels like kind of a sacred loyalty to self.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You explained that very well, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been an interesting gift in a way, because
Mm-hmm.
in those moments, like I have learned how to like hold myself in a different way.
Yeah.
Um, and it feels like a doubling down on self.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if anything, it's sort of just like strengthen that connection more. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, it definitely feels like, yeah, it just the old way of relating isn't even really available to me. Um, I feel into it sometimes of like, okay, well, what would be required of me to like get on board with this, or maintain a connection for the sake of attachment, and it doesn't, it feels violent,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
because these new muscles are now working, and like it would require such a such a severing within that actually feels like heartachy. And yeah, for those reasons, like it's
Mm-hmm.
not an option.
Man, so much of what you're saying resonates with me personally. And
Mm,
I think I said this when I interviewed Alexandra, actually, was there's this way, it's like, once you've, as an attachment type, once you've, as an adult, like clicked in to this
mm,
loyalty to self place, and you've tasted
mm,
it, and you know what that's like, and you know what it's like not to abandon yourself, then
mm,
it's like that becomes the most important thing to you. And it's just like, yeah, I just I get how strong that loyalty to self is, and how kind of uncompromisable it is. And
mhm,
yeah, the other thing that was coming up for me was about this piece about rejection and your sensitivity now to whether someone else is being psychologically safe for you.
mm,
Is it's like the original rejection wound, thinking of like an early baby. It's like, I want mom to smile at me and she's not smiling at me. And so
mm,
I just decide to accept a reality in which that's not available at all.
yeah,
And so I cut off the part of myself that needs it, and I
mhm,
lose essentially the hope that it exists. But then when you kind of recover that hope, it's like, wait, actually, no, I could get this,
yeah,
and I'm giving it to myself. I'm no longer rejecting that part of myself, and I'm giving it to myself. And now I'm looking for people who know how to give that to me too, because it's like, it is available. It's just not everywhere, you know.
yeah,
But like, some people know how, and so, um, yeah, that whole thing has a lot of heat for me, actually, just personally speaking, in like this moment of my life. But yeah, I'm curious if that resonates with you the way I just framed that.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And like as a body type, I feel like I pick up all of that in a real like sensation type of way,
Right. Yeah.
impressionistic. And I just know. And for me, it also it feels like my heart detecting their heart in a way because I feel
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
if the heart isn't included in the presence, then my heart's not going to land. It's um, so I feel like I'm encountering it, um, this particular dynamic with heart last people often.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing to describe to somebody who believes that they are providing safety, but if there just some sort of little undercurrent of like, mm, I can still feel judgment present here. I can
You can
feel
feel it.
like
Yeah.
you're ready to respond, and you're like, you know, already there's like your energy is filling the space.
Right.
I just want to pull back, and I have pushed through that in the early months of exploring this way of relating.
Yeah.
And it was incredibly painful to
Hmm. Hmm.
feel like I shared deep parts of myself and, it wasn't received in a careful way.
Right. Right.
Um, yeah.
I had a friend. So I have a friend, a very good friend, who's an 8, social self pres 8 with a 9 wing. And
Mhm.
something she said to me was that, I think she might have learned this from her therapist too, but just that as she started getting more comfortable sharing of herself in a more vulnerable way, her therapist said something like, your vulnerability is valuable, and you don't have to give it to everyone. You get to choose who you give it to. And so there's this, I mean, my experience of this is like, I want people to know who I really am. I want to share of myself with
Mm,
people. And the relationships that are the most nourishing and enduring for me are the ones that I feel like I feel like there's a space for me to share everything, and they can know my
yeah.
whole history, everything that I feel right now. Just I don't have to restrict myself in any kind of way.
Hmm.
And there's been a really interesting, I don't know, kind of balance I would say, just put it as a question for me. And I'm wondering if you are in this question too. It's like, on the one hand, there's me sensing whether a person has the capacity to receive what
Mm.
me, you know? And then there's also like my own loyalty to self project, which is sharing of myself and revealing myself, whether or not the container is present, without the preconditions being met, you know? And
Mhm.
that's a kind of like dilemma that I find myself navigating a lot is like, I want to choose to show up authentically, even if the container is not present, but then I also have to calibrate. And then as an attachment type, I'm like, wait, am I just calibrating to like attach to this person? Or is it like, am I calibrating because that's just, it's just the wise thing to do in this moment, not to share this thing to this person, you know?
Mhm.
So
Yeah. I mean, it feels to me like a moment to moment practice of discernment,
sure.
right? Like I
Right.
feel like I'm just instead of kind of just autopiloting through the world on attachment, it's like at every junction is a choice of do you
Right.
attach? Do you remain
It's a choice.
authentic?
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's it right there is maybe the answer to my
Mhm.
question, which is like, it's having loyalty to having the choice be available to you is the kind of the triumph, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it almost is like more important than what you do with that choice is the fact that you remember that there is a choice.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so where are you now?
Um, things are still settling for me.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, there has been a significant rewiring internally,
Mm-hmm.
and I everything looks different. So, the life that I have been waking up and participating in has um, different options available to me now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm taking it really moment by moment because I feel like it's hard to see too far down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. And um, one of the things that I realize is, as you were saying, like it is really important for me to find um, and just treasure the attachment connections, the friendships and relationships I have that I can show up fully in.
Mm-hmm.
Those are like the juiciest parts of my life right
Mm-hmm.
now.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't feel like there is any threat that I'm going to kind of like lose this new way of relating, but I may lose things that don't align now.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
God, isn't that amazing? That's a really radical shift.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking too a little bit about, and this could be a whole thing to get into, so I'll just keep this short, but
Mhm.
like the lines from 9 to 3 and 6, where like when nines are in a sort of diffuse inner state, they're kind of not one honoring themselves, or two kind of like seeing reality and it's like in
Mhm.
vivid 4K, texture.
Yeah.
And it feels like both lines are kind of happening for you now. It's like you're
Mhm.
awake, to your reality in like the high side of 6 way, and then the moving to the high side of 3 is like honoring yourself and seeing yourself and becoming
Uh-huh.
authentic. And I think a lot of nines get scared of the idea of integrating to 3. They sort of think about it in a way that is actually more consistent with like the lower side of 3, which is like I have to
Right.
get myself there, you know? But it's really
Yeah.
not that. It's kind of like when you start being loyal to yourself, there's just an inner blossoming that starts to happen and the shine starts from within. So,
Mhm.
so
Totally.
yeah.
So there's been something I've been reflecting on with that, which is like that feels like really new territory for me.
Mm,
And as a child, I always felt like my inner reality was the real world, and the outer reality was like something I tolerated.
interesting. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So there's a way of like now allowing those to match, create some sort of like yeah, it's like there's a reconciliation there where
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the doorway is open. Both can happen. Like who would have thought?
Mm-hmm.
Not me. I always tried to kind of like keep those very separate because the inner reality felt so sacred to me
Mm-hmm.
that it wasn't, you know, it's to be protected, not shared. Um,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, actually, that's really fascinating because, um, yeah, I mean, that's actually pretty profound what you just said. The sense of the inner reality is more real, but also there's like an unconscious fear that um, if it gets exposed to what external gaze or something that could potentially threaten it, it would get washed out. It's somehow the threat
Mm,
of exposure is like existential.
yeah.
And so, um, and so, conveniently you have this eight wing that can kind of like put up a wall, against the world to protect that inner world. And now opening it up and actually revealing it and risking exposure, um, allows for more kind of outer world, inner world integration. And you get to actually
Absolutely.
cultivate like the reference experiences that your inner world has sturdiness to exist out here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't need that kind of um, protection. It's actually, yeah, it's stronger in a
Hmm.
way
Hmm.
when it can, yeah, be out there.
I I can't help myself but notice the parallel to your daughter there, and how
Mm.
it's kind of like the way you're treating your inner world now is the same way that you have a relationship with her.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And I think that there's also like, um, just like a real, like, it's been a sense of really relaxing with all of this.
Hmm.
Because I'm realizing how much energy it takes to keep those worlds separate. Um,
Hmm.
and, you know, to exist in like reflexive attachment.
Right.
Um, that, you know, I feel I'm like, oh, I can just be me.
Hmm.
um, there is, there is some sort of, yeah, like deep inner peace, which is different than the peace that I'm trying to aggressively preserve at
Right.
times, you
Right.
know?
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. So how do you feel now, and what has this been like for you?
yeah, I feel good. I feel good. Um,
Hmm.
uh, yeah, I think, sometimes I lack the language to describe some of, um, these abstract concepts. So it helps to, you know, talk to be able to even, understand for myself because I'm just going through it in an experiential way.
Right. Right.
Um, but yeah, that process is also valuable for me.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting being body first and mind last to summon yourself to put words to that whole pre-verbal experience. Um, yeah, yeah. Well, experience is extremely articulate, so I don't think there's anything to worry about
Oops.
there. So yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. No, that's good. Yeah, I've been, there's been a lot to come out for me. I've been journaling a lot. I've been, um, creating a lot of music. There's just like, there's a way in which, um, there, these shifts just have a lot to say. So,
Right.
um, yeah, it's nice to be able to put that out there.
I'll just share a metaphor that came to me. Like, if let's say that you have like a gymnasium that's being air conditioned, and outside is very different temperature.
Yeah.
You open the door, but it takes a while for the
Uh,
kind of outside and inside airs to kind of equilibrate.
yeah.
There's something moving through the doorway, but it's like doesn't happen immediately. There's a process.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah. Well, thank you for doing this and for sharing
You're welcome.
yourself during this moment of your life. And I know that it's
Mm-hmm.
still ongoing and
Yeah.
that you're kind of mid-process with a lot of this stuff. And I would say like my experience of you is that you have this, like, two words are coming, like an elegance and a dignity. It just feels very like in your spine, the whole thing.
Oh.
Like there's a sturdiness.
Hmm.
So, I salute you. And
Thanks, Josh.
yeah, no, it's really a pleasure. It's a pleasure to see you in this
Hmm.
space.
Thank you. Well, it was,
Mhm.
the attachment group was so incredibly um, valuable. That was just a really wonderful alignment in the timeline of things for me to be able
Great.
to drop into that space and gain a little bit more language and framework for the things that I was experiencing. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Cool.
Mhm.
Well, all right. Thank you so much.
Okay. You're welcome.
Thank you so much for tuning into my conversation with Anna. I think Anna is so wise and dignified and grounded, and I learned a lot from this conversation, and I hope you did too. If you like this show and these episodes, then please click the like button or hit subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Or if you're listening to this as a podcast, then you can leave up to a 5-star review and also leave some comments. Those are zero cost, very effective ways to support me and my work and what we do here on the show and at the Enneagram School. I really appreciate that. If you would like to check us out and learn more about what we do at the Enneagram School, you can go to theenneagramschool.com. We have an intro course that I blabbed about in the beginning of this show that we are about to release, and I'm really, really excited about it. I'm very proud of it, and I think it's really great. So if you want to learn from the ground up, what is the Enneagram, how is it structured, what are the 9 types, how can you get your head around the whole thing, then this is a program for you. You can check it out at theenneagramschool.com. Also, when you sign up for our email list, you will also receive updates about what we're going to do next year. We're starting to set our schedule for next year, for 2025. And something that we're about to start doing is doing in-person workshops and retreats, which we're really excited about. We're going to offer our first ever in-person retreat as the Enneagram School, probably targeting the March range, probably somewhere in New York. Details TBD, but if you want to learn more about that, go to theenneagramschool.com, get on our email list, and you will find those updates. Finally, if you think that you are a good candidate to be interviewed on the show, I'd love to hear from you. I'm particularly looking for type 6s and type 1. So if you're one of those 2 types, let me know. But always looking for hexad types. Really just anybody, all the types. If you have high resolution interiority, if you're really good at self-reflecting, if you're familiar with the Enneagram and can do a deep conversation like this, then I'd like to hear from you. Preference goes to people who have been officially typed by the team at Enneagrammer.com. I think that the team at Enneagrammer.com is the world's most accurate, best typing service. And you can also check out, if you go their website, you can check out kind of their methods, and also how you can watch them type celebrities in real time with their subscription service. Oh, and actually, I want to say, I'm also looking for people who are of rarer instinctual stackings to interview. So I've interviewed a lot of people who are social self-preservation and self-pres social, but I'm also interested in interviewing people who are social blind and self-preservation blind. So if you're one of those, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I think that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.